Well, good day, Professor Alvarez. This is Travis Marois, and for my end of semester crop project, I have written out my project, but I decided it would be a nice change of pace to submit a video rather than a written research paper. You'll find references provided in the comment section that I plan to submit with the video. So there will be references, and I'm electing to do my project on Roselle, or Hibiscus sabdarifa, which is a species of hibiscus which is commonly used to make infusions or teas and drinks. It also has plenty of other uses, but that's primarily what it's used for, and that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, Roselle is an easy to grow plant. That's one of the reasons why I'm fond of it. I'm growing it this year myself. Here's a portion of a plant from my backyard. Common names for it, in addition to Roselle, would be sorrel. You might find in the Caribbean communities. Mexican Americans and Latin Americans might know it as Florida jamaica, and in fact it's commonly consumed as part of the aguas frescas tradition in Mexico. In the Caribbean, it's commonly consumed at Christmas time, and again known as sorrel. So lots of different applications. In addition, you can actually consume the leaves, should you be inclined to do so. A lot of vitamins, a lot of nutrients in there. And the calyx is commonly harvested and dried. So this is a dried calyx. It can also be consumed fresh. I don't have any fresh calyxes right now because it's not in season, but this gives you kind of an idea of what the dried calyx might look like. And the infusion or tea can be made with both dried or fresh calyxes. Personally, I prefer the flavor of fresh calyxes. I even found a study by Ramirez Rodriguez from 2011 where they examined the distinct flavor profiles and olfactory profiles of both hot infusion dried Roselle, cold infusion dried Roselle, and then again with hot and cold infusions of fresh Roselle. So that study did note different compounds or flavors from both preparations, and so there is a distinct taste between dried and fresh Roselle when used as a drink. You can also use the fresh Roselle as a cranberry substitute, and in fact one of the common names for the plant is Florida cranberry. And that brings me to an interesting point on why I'm focusing on Roselle, because believe it or not, Roselle used to be commonly planted in Florida in backyards, and I'm talking about the pre-World War II era. And a lot of this I get comes from Julia Morton's book, Fruits of Warm Climates, and it's available as an excellent document on the web by Purdue University, and so I'll be linking to that in the assignment. But she goes into great detail about how this once commonly planted plant has just virtually vanished from the public consciousness, at least here domestically in the US. Again, it is still popular overseas in the Caribbean, Latin America, but we seem to have forgotten about Roselle. And she even goes into great detail about how jellies used to be very popular with Roselle, and there seemed to be a boom in jelly production. There were factories being built in Australia, plans to build factories in Hawaii, and then all of a sudden the bubble burst. The Roselle market just plummeted and really disappeared into obscurity. And so part of my plan here is to grow the plant, increase public knowledge of it. You know, hey, we forgot about this great plant. It's relatively easy to grow, very nutritious, even has health benefits. And one of the studies that I'm looked at is by Faraji and Tarkani. From 1999, they looked at the antihypertensive properties of Roselle. And this was a small experiment, but there was a control group, an experiment group. Experiment group was giving, daily teas. You know, they drink the tea, and it examined to what extent after 15 days the blood pressure was reduced. The note I have here is after 12 days, the experimental group had an 11.2% lowering of the systolic blood pressure and 10.7% decrease in diastolic blood pressure. And so, I mean, that seems like a relatively big deal. Many in the U.S. have high blood pressure. And rather than take a pill, or a beta blocker, what if you just drank tea every day? So I'd have to believe that there is a market that can be built on Roselle. If not only just for the flavor of it, again, it does taste like cranberry. It's tart. Oftentimes it would be sweetened to produce the drink, somewhat like Kool-Aid. But, there are real health benefits which are documented. And those references will, again, be in the comments of the video. So just something neat to note here. Now, Roselle, it is a hibiscus. It would be best described as an herbaceous annual. Of course, it would be an angiosperm and a dicot. Anecdotally, I've heard of the plant being perennial in frost-free climates, but typically when I've grown it in the past, I've grown it for years. It's always been an annual for me. The life cycle begins as such. I typically start the seeds in liners and a mix of manure, topsoil, and perlite. I prefer that over sowing them directly in the ground because sometimes the germination rates can be less than ideal. So I want to have a nice strong plant to actually put into the field. I would then transplant them, once they get to about 8 inches in tall would be when I prefer to put them in the ground. At that point in time, I'll plant them with maybe a couple more handfuls of manure, mix it with the native soil, and then a good deal of, Osmocote, slow release coated fertilizer, and that's about it. They don't really require much more fertilizer after that point. Maybe an occasional top dressing, especially if I'm fertilizing some other things in the garden. I might throw them a handful, but they really don't need a lot. They do require regular water after the initial transplantation. So again, we're going to have an 8-inch little plant placed in the ground. He's going to need a bit of water, typically until the summer rains come, after which they're going to get everything they need for the rest of the year just from Mother Nature, just from the rains. And that's how my plants are now. I started with 15 plants. I don't have a very big yard, not a lot of space. I got a bug flying around me. So I just started with 15 plants. And I haven't watered them in probably about six or 8 weeks. They haven't gotten any water because we've been getting so much rain. So, barring any major drought, it's a great plant because you really don't have to water it much. So minimal inputs in both fertilizer and water once established. So far as maintenance, not a lot of input required because you're not really doing much to the plant. The life cycle is mainly vegetative growth until about late summer, early fall, when the plants start to flower, after which they will form the fleshy calyx, which can be harvested usually anywhere between middle of December up until the first week of January. So the actual labor is in planting the seeds themselves into the liners, then actually transplanting the liners into the ground, that little bit of watering to get it established, and then harvesting the plants. I mean, that's really your main inputs in the plants itself. So it's not like it's going to require a lot of regular maintenance. Personally, my management style would be to grow it along with a cover crop. I'm a fan of perennial peanut. As of right now, I just have the regular Florida cracker lawn, green thing that gets mowed. And so I just mow around the plants. And so I use that as my cover crop. Helps suppress weeds. But really, my management style with Roselle is fairly laid back. I don't like to do a lot to the plant. Excuse me. Sorry. So personally, if we look at pests of Roselle, a couple that I've noted in the past would be the root knot nematode, which, again, reference, I know I listened to Julia Morton's book. She goes into detail about that. Nematode attacks the root. Typically, this would be a fatal disease, and you might lose a certain percentage of your crop just from that. I've also noted mealybug, especially, one of my former employers grew Roselle, and we had a couple years with the pink hibiscus mealybug, which was bad. Obviously, if you're growing a hibiscus in an area with a lot of pink hibiscus mealybug, you're going to get a lot of mealybugs in your Roselle. So that was a problem in that year. This year, I've noted something different than in the past, and I actually have an example of it. This is a dead or dying